start a new broadcast.
Okay.
We are live.
Yeah, that was something.
You know, I feel a little bit like a tech wizard though, because in this amount of time, I was in the bowels of Zoom trying to come up with a plan B. And I just learned all kinds of stuff. I didn't know I could be doing like those crazy backgrounds behind me this whole time.
Wow.
That's been enabled the whole time.
You get hats and glasses and all kind of things with that.
Yeah.
I like to spice things up once in a while.
I did not even know that. Let me go ahead and get out of all those tabs. See, this is fine though, because you know what's happening right now? Folks are getting the opportunity to join while the stream catches up.
Nice.
Yep, so it's all perfect.
I had a feeling it would be.
Yeah. I say if there's not tech issues that slow it down, are we really living in the age of the pandemic when everything's virtual?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, so great. Let me just close all the other tabs to improve my bandwidth. Great. Thank you so much for sticking with me through those trials and tribulations.
It was my pleasure, and I got to feel like a little bit of a tech wizard too as I closed browsers. I don't like to brag, but
Okay, so if you are just joining, I have Norman Conti, Dr. Norman Conti, here with me today. And I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I'll be honest, this was like my most intimidating one. I was trying to remember the name of the book that you authored, and so I was Googling about you. And in doing so, Google produced your CV to me. And I said, now, dang, that's just a whole lot of publications is what that is.
well, yeah, and for the rest of this interview, I'd like to be referred to as His Holiness the Dolly Conti. So
okay, great. I will try and remember all of that.
I remember that because it could be an issue.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so thank you so much for taking time to have this conversation with me. I've been really looking forward to it. It's hard to imagine what could be more topical or more top of mind, especially lately. I mean, we have the updates frequently on the George Floyd trial, and then as that's happening, there's another police shooting there in Minneapolis. And while all of that is happening and making national news, here in Pittsburgh, in my neighborhood, there have been 2 murders because of violence this week. And then not in my neighborhood, but last night there were 2 killings of young Black boys, teenagers in the city, not in my neighborhood, but in the city, in Marshall Shadeland, and then one in Lincoln, Leamington, Belmar.
Yeah.
And so the conversation around like what needs to happen for policing in my neighborhood, the answer that, you know, my neighbors and I have is not get rid of the police. You know, the answer that we have is we need the police. There is a whole lot of gun violence that's happening, but I can understand when I see, you know, the national news, I can understand, you know, where people are coming from. And so I've been deeply curious to hear your perspective as I've lived through this week and last week alongside everybody else in the country. So before we dive into all of that, I'd love for you to just share a little bit about yourself. I know that there are people in the Peace Building Conspirators group who don't know the name Norman Conti.
What?
I know. There are Dalai.
They call themselves conspirators.
Yeah. So I'd love if you could share a little bit about how you came to be passionate about criminal justice reform, and maybe even how you became aware of the need for this to be a priority.
Well, first of all, I'm very thrilled and honored to be here. My name is Norman Conti. I'm a Pittsburgh kind of guy. I grew up in a little town called Newcastle, about an hour north of here. When I was a senior in high school, it was the time of the Rodney King beating and the trial and the riots that ensued. And I went to college. So it would have been like that May when I was a senior in high school or whenever it was the beating. And then a freshman in college, by the end of my first year, that's when the verdict came out and everything happened in LA. And I was a young man who wanted to work in law enforcement. I wanted to be a police officer, or I wanted to be an FBI agent or something like that. I wanted to be someone who helped. I want to go out and help people. And coming from a small town and coming to Pitt, it was Manhattan to me, right? It was the biggest place in the world, and I was so blown away by it, and all kind of different people, right, and all kind of different ideas. And watching the videotape of that beating, watching the trial, listening to the people around me react, it really changed how I saw everything. Or at least, I don't know if it was the change, but it was the first step in changing things.
Mm-hmm.
And I was deeply moved by that. And it started me thinking, I started thinking about what law enforcement does, what police do. I started thinking about what public safety is. I started to think about the role of race and racism in all this. What even is our criminal justice system?
Yeah.
So I did 4 years of undergraduate at Pitt, and by the end, I had barely graduated from high school. So by the end of it, I was a pretty good student, and I decided instead of being a cop or something like that, I would keep going to school. And I thought maybe instead of being a cop, I could study cops and learn about cops and maybe do more good that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I did. I went into the PhD program in sociology there. I was very, very lucky to have that opportunity. At the same time, my wife, she wasn't my wife then, but she had got a job at SeaWorld outside of Cleveland. And we moved there, and I commuted back and forth to school. And towards the end, it was when it was getting time to write my dissertation, I contacted the Cleveland police and said, I'd like to write my dissertation about a homicide unit and the jokes they tell. Because as an undergraduate, I don't think I told you this, but as an undergraduate, I had spent a month with the Allegheny County homicide unit. And a lot of people in Pittsburgh know the name Jimmy Savetic. Jimmy was a narcotics cop most of his career, but he was a homicide detective when I knew him. But he was also a boxing trainer and a poet, and he died a few years back. And I got to run around with him for a month, and it was the most fun you can have around dead bodies. So,
so I have permission to make a meme of your face and that quote. It was the most fun you could have around dead bodies.
The second most fun you can have with, I don't know. In any event, I was really struck by the sick jokes. That was an example, right? And it was like, this is fascinating to me because on one level it's kind of funny, and on another level it's terrible. And you have to recognize that these folks are doing this as a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
Right? Laugh to stop from crying, make it dehumanize the whole thing. Because if I overly humanize it, I'm gonna, whatever. I'm not gonna be okay.
Or like, I don't know what overly humanizing would be, but like if you allow yourself to feel the humanity of what's happening.
Yep.
I was talking with a mutual friend of ours very recently about his work and how compassion fatigue is a thing.
I don't know how they do it. I really don't. We're sitting in very easy positions compared to that. So in any event, I wanted to go and spend a year with their homicide unit. But the commanding officer kicked me out after a month. I thought for sure I'd win him over. It didn't work out. But I met the commanding officer of the police academy at the time, and he invited me to come do my dissertation on the police academy. I was blown away because it turned out his dad had been a professor at Kent State, so he was open to academic things. But my experience with the police academy was I'm walking with an old homicide cop, and we're going through the police academy to get somewhere else, and all the recruits yell "post," and they jump up against the wall. It's like in a movie. I'm like, oh my god! And he looks at me, and goes, "Kid, around here, these people are lower than whale shit." Can you say that on this show?
You can say whale shit.
Yes, they're lower than whale shit. And I was like, what? That's not good. That's not a good. The only other person I ever heard say that expression was my grandmother. So that told me a lot.
Yeah.
So I was really nervous. And I was like, this doesn't, I don't know. So I ended up deciding to do the thing with the police academy. And it turned out to be fascinating because I ended up studying how people go from being more like ordinary citizens to more like what we think of as police. And I've spent the last 21, 22 years on that topic, with the addition of maybe 14 years ago, I was trained in something called Inside Out, the prison exchange program.
I'm excited to talk about Inside Out and how that birthed the Elsinore Bennu Restorative Justice think tank. Did I pronounce all of that correctly?
Wonderfully. And so I spent all this time on policing and race in policing and race within the police, really. Like, how do Black, white, Latino cops get along? How do they relate to each other over the course of the training? What does that say about the big picture?
Absolutely. And one thing that I learned while I was just reading up on things and just preparing for this interview, or this conversation, really, I think interview is a strong word. I'm not Audie Cornish over here. But as I was reading about specifically the Rodney King, like the trial around the police officers involved, the 4 officers involved, 3 were acquitted. The jury failed to find a verdict either way on the 4th officer. And so I was reading about the jury and how they were all white except for 1 biracial man, 1 Asian man, and 1 Latino. I guess it didn't say man. Let me stop. Biracial person, Latino person, Asian person. And I did not get a gender breakdown of the jury. But what that made me think of and then investigate more is how it can be so discriminatory in jury selection.
Yeah.
And part of that has to do with the way juries are selected. So if it's okay, I wanted to take a quick second to maybe provide some education about jury selection and how I know if you're anything like me, when you get called for jury duty, it's like a headache and a half. And I get called for jury duty more than any other person I know. Like, I don't know. I have been a registered voter since I was 18. I'm 33 now. I've been called to jury duty 5 times. Like, that's really, I think, more than normal. But I know it's kind of a headache, but it is a critical part of our system. And we have the right in our country to a trial by peers. And so I want to talk about that word peers and why it matters to make sure that we are allowing there to be diverse representation on a jury. So the reason why there's often not is because there's 2 ways, for example, in the state of Pennsylvania that people are called to jury duty. And I promise I'll make this quick. This is not going to be a 90-minute conversation about jury selection. But there's 2 ways that you can get called to jury duty. One, in the state of Pennsylvania. One is they go through records from the DMV, so people who have driver's licenses. The second is voter registration. So if we want to have a conversation about making sure that juries can be more representative, then we also need to have a conversation about making sure that we are not making it difficult for people of color to register to vote or to get driver's licenses. And there's lots of reasons around why there are disparities in those things as well. And if we talked about that, I think we'd be on perhaps a whole nother subject that is, I think, directly related, though. But I can't help but wonder if the outcome of Rodney King, well, it wasn't Rodney King's trial, but the trial of the officers involved, you know what I'm talking about, could have had a different outcome had there been a more diverse representation and had there been more people who have different experiences, you know? So quick thoughts on that. When you hear about voter registration laws, when you hear about these kinds of things, there are implications beyond just, is it difficult to vote or not? There are implications beyond that when it comes to the criminal justice system. So quick side on that.
Yeah, that's the way the racism is baked into our system, right? It's unavoidable, right? And that's why we get the results we get so often in these cases.
Yeah. So, okay. So thank you for sharing a little bit about your professional background. I wanted to talk with you. I mentioned that I stumbled upon your CV, and so there was a lengthy list of published pieces, and I was wondering if there were a couple that you would want to call our attention to that maybe really represent your heart and your vision for restorative justice when people are experiencing the justice system. And I do have a couple that I wanted to pull out and talk about, but I wanted to give you the opportunity if there's some that really you feel are representative of your heart and vision.
Well, that's an interesting question because, as I mentioned, I'm trained as a sociologist, right? I went to graduate school for a long time. I read a lot of books. I wrote a lot of papers. I did a dissertation. I'm a full professor at Duquesne. That means I had to publish all those things to have the job that I have.
See, okay.
Yeah. And along the way, I've become, in some ways, disenchanted with all of that because, you know, professors write for other professors.
Mm.
Who we write for. And I'm not always, I mean, that's important because you're informing the discipline, you're shaping the science of it. My favorite thing I've published so far is called Stanton Heights.
I saw that piece, and I used to live in Stanton Heights.
Yeah, that's my heart right there. And I have a follow-up piece to that called East Pittsburgh that'll be coming out.
About Antoine Rose. Mm-hmm.
So Stanton Heights is all about from Paul Shulo and the other 2 police officers that were murdered by a white supremacist in Stanton Heights. Leon Ford, who was shot and paralyzed by a Pittsburgh police officer 6 minutes or a mile down the street from where these things happen, and all the uncanny connections, because it's Pittsburgh and we have like all the resources here, but also it's kind of a small town, so you're always connected to people. So
yeah,
and that's not written like a sociologist. I've had the great fortune to know John Edgar Weidman, the author, and sort of take him on as a mentor. And I send him stuff I write, he sends me stuff he writes, and it's just an unbelievable thing. So that's me trying to be John Edgar Weidman. Or there's another guy named Roger Genvier Smith. He's an actor and a writer, and he has a piece called Rodney King on Netflix.
Yes.
It's also trying to be him, or trying to figure out how I could do work like that, like those 2 men. And I've actually gotten to know Roger. I was just with him before I was with you today. So it's kind of an intersection of art and science.
So let's talk about John Edgar Weidman, because one of the pieces that I am fascinated by is Brothers and Keepers. And I'd love to hear you speak a little bit about that, because when I was just trying to, like, in general, know who you are, I misunderstood and thought that you had written Brothers and Keepers. And I was thinking, wow, he would have been quite young. Like, I
do a lot of royalty checks. And
yeah, I was going to piece it together because of your relationship with his brother. I got a little twisted around with that. Yeah. So I'd love for you to share about Brothers and Keepers and your relationship to that book. Go.
10 years ago, I took an inside out class into SCI Pittsburgh, and all the name cards of each guys, all there are on this desk in the front of the room. And I look down and I see Robert Weidman. And because the prison had closed for a while and then they reopened it and they brought people back, I had forgot that he was even still there. I see Robert Weidman on this ID card and I'm like, oh my God. So I'm going around the room and I see him and I go, you're not my best tough guy voice, because I wanted to scream like a 14-year-old girl, because on some level, anyway.
As someone who has been a 14-year-old girl, I'll say that I was extremely tough. Yeah.
Well, yes. See that this is me. This is the problem. Well, we'll get more to the problems with me.
Okay. But, I planned to end with that.
Yeah, yes. So. I said, you're not related to that writer, are you? And he goes, yeah, it's my brother. And I'm like, oh!
Yeah.
So, and honest to God, I that's Robert Farouk Weidman. He's, one of my favorite human beings on this planet. And I was happy just to know him. And in so many ways, he's better than his brother.
I'll quote you on that too. Yeah. We've got the dead bodies quote.
Yeah. I've told both of them. I've told both of them that, so it's fine. Okay. And eventually, it just happened that I said, well, let's have an event and we'll invite people. And Farouk, we invited his brother, and he came. Right, it's this powerful thing that he came. He did a symposium. We were supposed to take him into the prison, and at the last minute, the prison said no because he's related to an inmate there, an incarcerated man. And it was just this. There's actually a YouTube video of it of John talking about it. It was so powerful. And because his brother is my brother in a way, so he's my brother once removed, and I was able to bring him back. If that was October, I was able to bring him back in May and actually get him in and have a think tank meeting. Like, we had the first Inside Out class at SCI Pittsburgh 10 years ago. A couple years later, we started our official think tank, right? The Elsner Benny Think Tank for Restorative Justice. And
Look, these are the times we're living in.
yeah, so we've been moving forward. We've been working. I've gotten to know him more and more. And I sent him a paper I wrote about when I tried to join a motorcycle gang. That's actually why I looked like this.
Okay.
It didn't work out but it worked out for them more. It didn't work out for me. And he was interested, and we started going back and forth. And he would come to town, and I would take him out to dinner and make him laugh. And got to be a really close relationship. And he's a very important mentor. And Farouk is more of not a mentor as a writer, but more of a mentor as a human being.
Is Brothers and Keepers is it a nonfiction like account of what happened, or is it?
It's a memoir, and you might have seen. I have a piece. It's not out yet, but it's.
I saw that it's forthcoming. Yeah,
it's being printed now, but it's called The Blackness That Incriminated Me.
Yeah.
So the book, Brothers and Keepers, it's about John as this extraordinary black man, right? But he can't just be an extraordinary man, or he can't be a person. He's from Homewood. He's a great athlete. He's a brilliant student. He gets a scholarship to go to the University of Pennsylvania, where he's a great basketball player and a great student. And what sort of the cost to his soul is of having to code switch, right, and shift between the street and the ivory tower, and how that sort of line of fault or that division within himself really damaged his soul and made him into who he didn't want to be. And at the same time, Farouk is 10 years younger than him, so he didn't really, know him that well, because by the time he was interesting to a 18-year-old, he was 8, John was 18, John went to college.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that from there, John goes to Oxford. He comes back to Penn again as a faculty member. He goes out to Larimer, Wyoming, and in this whole time, Farouk's kind of in the early stages of this life of crime, ends up in just the dumbest way ever with a life sentence.
So you're talking about second-degree murder. Yeah. And this, I would love to quickly plug the conversation I had with Carrie Bozich last week. If you guys haven't watched it, I posted the article about felony murder or second-degree murder. This is a conversation that it makes sense to have.
Yeah.
And so if you didn't catch it, in short, maybe Your Holiness, Dolly.
Real quick, I hit you with the basics real quick if you want.
Yeah, just like.
And this will be a real world example.
Yeah.
So Farouk and his buddies, they need money. They have this scam where they're going to have a truck, and they're saying it's full of TVs, but really it's 2 guys in the back with guns. Mm-hmm. And they know where the fences are, the guys that buy stolen property and sell it. Mm-hmm. So they go, they hook up the meeting. What they do is okay, here's the TVs, but it's the guys with the guns. So they steal your money, put you in the truck, and go away. It all goes haywire. A guy gets shot in the shoulder or somewhere and is taken to the hospital and allowed to die from doctor malpractice, right? So all 3 of those guys ended up with life sentence, because the way it works, felony murder is if you are a participant in carrying out a felony and someone gets killed, you are responsible as if you pulled the trigger. Now, in that case, you could say that the fence and his 2 cousins who were there committing the crime altogether of stolen goods, maybe they're all responsible, right? But just the 3 black guys go to prison, right? So years later, they find out that it was malpractice, and it was because they didn't have the right tube, or they just let him sit in the hallway and he bled out. The family got $100,000 settlement, which was huge in Pittsburgh at the time in the early 80s. This never was disclosed to the criminal court situation. Farouk ended up doing 44 years in prison for not killing anyone, for being there when a guy got shot that led to him dying of medical malpractice. Yeah. A couple years back, he went up for commutation, and this is when things were starting to change a little bit in Pennsylvania. Okay. Fetterman, Shapiro, those folks. And he was granted commutation after 44 years, and now he's back out with us.
So the bottom line to understand about second-degree murder or felony murder is that if you are in any way participating in a crime that leads to someone's death, And there are other examples, even in the state of Pennsylvania, where, you know, a woman's purse was stolen. When the purse was stolen, she fell down. She was an elderly woman. She died several days later in a hospital from complications because of falling. So it wasn't medical malpractice in that situation. She was an elderly person, and she complications from her fall. But the point is that in second-degree murder, the intention was not to kill anyone.
Right.
The other thing to understand is that even if you are present, so even if you're not the person that pushed her, but you are the person that split up the cash in her wallet, then you are just as guilty as anyone else when it comes to felony murder. So there's lots of racial disparities, lots of information. Again, I posted a link. There's probably multiple articles out there about felony murder and how in the state of Pennsylvania we're looking at changing things. And then bottom line, vote, vote, vote. May 18th, you have the opportunity to vote for judges at a variety of levels that could forever change, or could for years to come change the way that works. So last thing about that. And then I would love to hear you talk about creating the thin blue line. That really caught my attention when I was reading through your CV. Do you care to share at all about what that means?
Sure. Well, for me, creating the thin blue line means the way we take people and make them into police officers, right? And I teach in a police academy. I work with the police. I work with guys in prison. I work with people in the community, right? I'm in this weird tightrope between all these different things, trying to make it work. I have for my entire career been deeply critical of the police training system, right? Not necessarily of individual police officers, but of the way we train them. I feel like and it turns out that Pittsburgh is a little more progressive than you would think in terms of its police academy. In fact, I'm shocked by it. It's so progressive. But other places I've seen, it's like they're really pushing that us versus them thing. You know, you're all in whale shit. You're the lowest of the low, the scum of the earth, sort of military Full Metal Jacket kind of boot camp stuff. And it's really based
on stuff you see on shows or movies.
Yeah. And the idea is that you're not a citizen, you're less than a citizen right now, with the idea, and you submit to that degradation in the hopes of eventually being elevated to this situation. I'm a police officer. I'm more than a citizen, right? I have the state authority behind me in a way that you don't.
Yeah.
That's the reality of what police are. At the same time, when it's framed in sort of a moral superiority, or, you know, there's obviously, just like everything else in this country, incredibly racist, right? Whether it's the medical system, whether it's the school system, however you want to look at it. So I don't think police are special in the fact that you see racism play out there. You know, I always make the argument, I'm a middle-class, white, male, heterosexual, highly educated, whatever. I have racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, you name it. It's all in me. And that's my burden. And that's my inner jihad, right? That's the battle I have to fight to try to get past that. And so I know that's in me. Maybe you're some kind of special creature and it's not in you, but it probably is.
In fact.
Yeah. I kind of had a feeling. We'll get you a official title by the end of this, like I have.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
You're welcome. But the idea is, and this is a hard thing to get through to people sometimes, the difference between structural racism and individual racism, right? I have internalized racism in me. I can't not, right? It's like if there's a chemical factory next door, I'm going to have toxins in me.
Yes.
Right? It's silly to think I won't. So if I'm living in a racist society, I have racism within me. At the same time, there's a structural system, right? That I'm much less responsible for.
Yeah.
Right. So this is the idea that we're bringing police into this system. We're showing them every terrible video of how a police officer ever got killed. Right. Making them super paranoid.
Yes.
Making them think that everyone out there has a gun. And in the 20 years ago, that wasn't true. It might be true now. Maybe everyone does have a gun now. I'm not.
Listen, I can't comment
Yeah.
in present situations in my neighborhood. I do not have an unbiased opinion about
That's
this.
right. So it's like everybody, and that's one thing that's actually changed. I was like, it's not like that out there. I was thinking in the late '90s and in the early 2020s. I'm like, oh, it is. Yeah, everyone has guns, and 10 of them probably. But the idea is, police officers do get hurt. Police officers do get killed. I look at policing from a social problems perspective, where I look at the problems that they respond to, the
Mhm.
problems they cause, and the problem that they suffer from.
Yeah.
It's all that, just like you, me, and everyone else suffer from, cause, and respond to problems, right?
Mhm.
And what is it about their system? What is it about their training? What is it about their culture that could be changed so that they're suffering less, right? And if they're suffering less, maybe they'll cause less suffering, right?
Yeah.
If they're suffering less and causing less suffering, maybe they'll solve more problems, right?
Mhm.
It's recognizing that police officers are human beings, and there's this thing right now where America, we want to just we want to make everything disappear that we don't like.
Mhm.
That we're that, we are the thing we don't like, and it's, oh, drugs are problematic, so they need to just all go away, right? Or police, oh, we got to abolish them, right? So it's, yeah, there are problems, but we have this fanatical way of dealing with things in this country that seems to always make it worse.
Yeah, so I'd like to take a quick pause. We have a comment that I wanted to share. And again, if you are watching this live, thank you so much. In order for us to be able to see your name and your profile picture, there's a little button you have to click, enabling StreamYard to do that. And if you're not comfortable with that, that is totally fine. But thank you, whoever you are. All we can see is Facebook user that says this idea of toxins are everywhere. So one thing that I was truly hoping would happen in this conversation is for all of us in the Peace Building Conspirators group to leave with some ways of talking about structural racism to engage more people in the conversation. So one thing that I think about in my professional work, there's a lot of talk about D&I, diversity and inclusion, which is so important, so important. And when I think about taking that thinking out of HR and into the community, I think about like real diversity. This doesn't just mean making more minorities involved. It means everybody being involved in the conversation. And so one of the things that I think about a lot is that I tend to be more liberal in this group. I like to be forthcoming about that. This is a nonpartisan group. There are people from many perspectives, faith traditions, races and ethnicities present in this group and perhaps watching this conversation. And so while we want to be inclusive of many perspectives, I always try to be forthcoming. So I know that my circles tend to be more liberal. And what I have definitely realized in the last year and a half is that we're not going to get where we want to be in our country by me and my liberal friends shouting into the abyss about our perspectives, about how everybody else is racist and whatever. And just like you're saying, toxins are everywhere. Like a big thing for me has been reckoning with my own toxins and understanding that it is possible for me to go deeper into love and deeper into being someone that is aligned behind love, not aligned behind fear.
Yeah.
Because fearful people make decisions in survival mode that do not honor who they really are.
That's right.
And so I offer that perspective because I think that when we talk about structural racism, there are people even in my own family who are loving people who are immediately like, I'm not a racist. Stop everyone calling me a racist. And, I just want to like hug them and be like, I would love to hear your best problem solving in this conversation. Like, I would love to hear from you how we could work together to make this better, because there are Republicans that do not want there to continue being such incredible bias in policing, such incredible racism in policing. There are Republicans who are aware of this problem. And I think the less polarizing we can have around it, the more inclusive we can be in the conversation, the closer we will get to actually solving the problem versus just being in this like for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And it's just like this back and forth, blue versus red, when it comes to this topic. And that's a good way to find gridlock. It's not a good way for there to actually be restorative justice. So I also love that toxins are everywhere language to help maybe de-venomize a bit the conversation around structural racism, to realize I'm not calling you specifically out. I'm saying we can work together to solve a problem that we can both admit exists. Mm-hmm. So one thing that I would like to do is, anyone who is watching, there are some really specific questions that I know lots of people have, and specific opinions that people have about the defund police movement, about abolish police, about disband police. So I would love, Norman Conti has thought a lot about this and written a lot about these kinds of topics. And so if you have questions or opinions about this, I would love for you to put them in the comments so that we can have a conversation and respond to that. And while you are thinking about how to thoughtfully represent your perspective and your question at the height of your integrity, I'd like for you, Norman, to share a little bit about Inside Out. We haven't covered that base fully. So while the stream is catching up and they're typing their questions, could you share with us a little bit about Inside Out and what that's doing right now?
Sure. It's actually a good segue, because what you're talking about, this connection between individual racism and structural racism, it's like, as long as we believe that we're two white people, right, we're infected with racism. Mm-hmm. Racism comes first. There's no such thing as race. Race is a product of racism. It isn't the other way around.
Race is a product of racism.
So looking at this screen, I think there's two white people, or a kind of an ivory person and a reddish person. But as long as we think that we're corrupted, and if we look at it, whether it's in toxins or whether it's almost like a addiction language, like AANA, right? Like, I have this problem, it's bigger than me. I didn't ask for all these biases to be put into my head as a child, but they were.
Yeah.
Aliens or some foreign government captured me and did that. You'd know I was a victim of something, right? Yeah. But the fact that it's my culture did that, well, I might even want to defend my culture. So Inside Out, you take a group of college students, you take them into a correctional facility. They have all their ideas of what prison or jail is. You have a group of men or women who are incarcerated there. They have their idea of what college kids are. You bring them together. You have a semester-long course. You don't stay there. You just go with everyone. Sometimes thinks, "Oh, you live in prison for it?" No, it's not that kind of an exchange program. But you have a course, and it could be yoga, right? It could be theater. It could be philosophy, English, history, right? I do criminal justice or sociology, things like that. And what happens is, it's so tense in the first few minutes because nobody knows what to do. And the kids are scared because they've never been in a correctional facility before. And the men or women are scared too, because these are the smartest students in the prison or the jail. And they're now there with real college students, whatever that means. And what if they find out that they're not as smart as real college, when they're actually smarter? And then you have them interacting with each other. You have them doing basic things, icebreakers. And like, in a snap of a fingers, it's all human beings, and it's like a family reunion.
Yeah.
We're recognizing that, okay, these are white kids from Duquesne, and these are black guys in the Allegheny County Jail, but we're having this conversation, and that, I wouldn't say it fully evaporates, but it dissipates. Mm-hmm. And I've been doing that with police as well, and that's the same thing happens. It's even more powerful.
So my understanding is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, you did not create the Inside Out program. You were a student of it, and then came up with the idea for your dissertation to, instead of it being instead of it being students going into the prison, that you would take police into the prison and create this type of camaraderie. Has got to be too strong of a word.
No, it might not be. Just to see each other, just to see and hear each other for a few hours a week, for however many weeks. The idea is what I said to you about my criticisms of police training system. It's easy. It's easy for me to go anywhere and tell you everything that's wrong with the place, right?
Mm.
Everyone wants to do that, but I went to school for a long time to be able to say it with a little more authority. But the truth is, you might want to think about a way to make it better, right? So when I got involved with Inside Out, I thought, well, what if you did Inside Out with police recruits and you got to see that it isn't exactly us versus them. Maybe it's us and them, or maybe we're all them, or they are us. And for me, having spent a lot of time with cops and a lot of time with guys in prison, they're the same people.
Hmm.
They are so the same people. You know, you're mostly talking about men who are seeking status,
Hmm.
men who be aggressive, men who want money, right? Wolves, right?
Hmm.
They're all wolves. And I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way or a pejorative way. I'm a wolf. So anyway, so for me, it was bring these people together, see what they have in common, understand they don't want to see a 15-year-old get killed in Lincoln or wherever. Nobody wants that.
Nobody wants that.
Yeah.
So now share, if you're willing, how the Elsinore Bennu think tank for restorative justice was born out of that experience of officers spending time with. Now, is it people serving life sentences, or is it just anybody in the criminal justice system?
It started, the story I told you about for the first time I met Farouk, that was the fall of 2011. Maybe in the summer of 2013, I came back in and said, I'd like to start a think tank. And maybe there were 10 guys in the room. And I'd like to start a think tank. And I had this idea about something we could do with the police. And half the room walked out. Right there. Okay, well, it's actually a much easier sell to any chief of police than it is to any group of guys in prison. So I had to explain the thing I just did with you, where I talked about how similar they are.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about it, it's like, oh yeah, it's like two football teams might hate each other, but they're made up of football players.
That's interesting. That is an interesting analogy.
Yeah, it's the same thing. So half of them left. The guys that stayed got a real hard time from their fellow incarcerated men, but they stuck with it. They believed in it. One of my favorite guys in the world, Malachi, said, "Wow." He asked me why I wanted to do this, and he had really traumatic experiences with police. And I said, "Well, you know, Malachi, you're in here. People you love are out there, and so are the police. And the police aren't going anywhere. There's always going to be police. Do you want to have an effect on police or not?" And these guys, when you meet serious men and women who are in prison, what they want more than anything is to have an impact on the world for the positive. They accept, they understand what they did, why they're there. Some of them really didn't do much, but some of them did.
Mm-hmm.
And they understand that they've done harm in their community, and they would like the opportunity in whatever form to have an impact beyond that prison. And this was a chance. Those guys said, you know, maybe we can buy a couple seconds on each side of an interaction where someone could have ended up dead. I work really closely with Leon Ford. I always say he's my nephew, and his son calls me Big Uncle Norm. So if you don't want to go with the Dalai Lama thing,
Big Uncle Norm. That sounds.
It's when I met him and got to know him, I felt really guilty because here's this story. Oh, look, this guy with all these publications and his career's going okay. And when I was focusing on all the nonsense that you do to make it in the academic world, I wasn't out in the street or with the police doing things that would make a difference, right? And I finished my dissertation in 2000. I was working my way through tenure and everything else. And in 2011, Leon was shot and paralyzed by a police officer. I wasn't doing anything to prevent that from happening, right? So I have to understand that I'm complicit, right? Just like I say, I have all this racism in me that's connected to the bigger structural racism. I have all this classism or whatever, careerism, right? And that's connected to not being an activist in the way that you're supposed to, not going out there and, you know, living your life as a prayer, prayer in action, or, you know, making a difference. You're trying to make it instead of make a difference. And I get to spend a lot of time with him, and, you know, I love him so much, and I don't think about it, but there are times when we're going down the street and talking, and I'm up here and he's down there in that wheelchair, And I think, Jesus, and I got to help him get his wheelchair up the steps into my house. And it's like, I might not have put him in that wheelchair, but I didn't stop him from being in that wheelchair. And that's me, you, and everyone else. Maybe me a little more because this is the career I chose. But, and this is the thing about, this goes back to the abolishing the police thing. All the police do is what we tell them to do. The police do not make these decisions. The police are put where we put them to do where they do. And then we want to be mad at them and say, see, they're racist. Not me. It's not me that shot this guy or hurt that guy or killed that guy. And again, that's just bullshit because it is. That's what America is. It's of many, one. And when you're talking about people getting together in these groups, we try to have, that's so powerful because that's the opposite of what the people in control want. They want the liberals here. They want the conservatives here. They want this group there, this minority group there. And they want to shave off thin slices of each. There's consulting firms that figure out how to do this and what the equation is to get their candidate elected. Right? It's strictly about political power and whether it's trans, right? I saw somewhere 0.64% of the country identifies as trans, yet we're supposed to believe they're invading all the bathrooms and they're taking away all the girls' scholarships or something. That's impossible, right? So that's sort of this thing that keeps happening where people want to get us so wound up on these issues and separate us so their candidate can get elected and we don't have a better country.
A while ago, I asked a question in this group of what are the things that make it most difficult to talk to people who disagree with you? Like when you want to have a meaningful conversation, because that's a big part of why this group is here. Like, how can we have meaningful conversations with people who see it differently? That is the spirit, the heart and spirit of mindful improv methodology is we're improvising together. You are my scene partner. How can I listen and build and stay in that collaborative headspace where ideas can be born, because where good ideas at least can be born that are about love and connection and not about fear and resentment, you know? And anyhow, one of the responses to that question, like what makes it so hard, somebody commented the profitability of outrage. And I was like, wow, I hadn't necessarily thought about that. But yes, that is, I see it now that thought has been planted in my head, and maybe this is affirmation bias, but I see it, you know? So we have a question, but I actually think it would be a good question to be asked 2 questions from now, because what I would love to hear you speak to is specifically when people say, abolish the police, that paints a pretty clear message that says, I'd like there not to be any more police officers. But there are other people saying things like defund the police. And I read an article in which you were interviewed where you said that you think that people saying defund the police might actually mean more like reallocating resources to where, you know, if we are spending 50% of the money on police, what if we shave off 10% of that and put it into, and now I'm paraphrasing because I don't think you specifically called out like social workers trained to handle crisis situations, but something of that sort. What do you think is the real deal? Like how much of the defund the police, disband the police do you think is really about just reallocating resources? And how much of it is really about we want no more police?
The whole thing is a hustle. It's neither of those things.
Okay.
It's a con. First of all, if this defund the police or abolish the police, this is going to turn Pennsylvania red forever. Right, and you're a liberal. I'm far to the left. Right, we're going to become the next Ohio. It's not going to be one election. It's going to be this is where we are. The police. Okay, theoretically, you get rid of the police. Right, none of the federal agencies are going.
Right,
the state agencies aren't going. Right, you're going to see more private policing. You're going to see more beefed up police in all the surrounding areas of the city.
Because you're saying get rid of the local police or even the state police, but then it's like we just have these federal agencies that are even more militarized doing the job of police.
And the state police, because they're not going anywhere either.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
The state of Pennsylvania is not going to get rid of their police. And you're asking for a worse situation. So it's kind of like I understand. Like my wife's nephew had in a car crash a long time ago, and I wish there weren't cars anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't worth it for all the pain. You understand? So I understand that. Imagine this. Imagine a person, a woman, black. She becomes a police officer. She always wanted to do it, right? She goes to the police academy. She comes out. She's standing in the line, and there's protesters throwing rocks and telling her to kill herself, right? And then she goes back to her zone, and she's watching other cops chase black kids off corners and beating them for running.
Right.
Teach them to run faster or get better shoes. There are such heroic officers out there who do this at their own peril, psychologically, in terms of their soul, right? There are so many great cops that I know that are so trying, but that doesn't excuse the fact that they're a part of this horribly racist system that you and I are a part of because we pay taxes at the bare minimum.
Yeah.
We're citizens in America. We own this. So it's very easy to want to point and blame the police for everything when it's just not their fault. And even when it's their fault, they're doing what we told them to do.
So would you say that you agree with the line of thinking that says there's a few bad apples?
No, I don't agree with that either. The system is rotten. The criminal justice system in this country is terrible. We incarcerate more people, more citizens for the purpose of crime control than any other nation in the history of this planet.
Mm-hmm.
That's a horrifying thing. And I've known that for 20 years, right? So people older than me have known it longer, right? And we want to act like, and we want to pin that all on this one group. Mm-hmm. It's not that simple. And even the idea of defund, that's taking away, I think, steam from decriminalize, right? What we should be doing is, instead of saying, hey, let's get rid of the police, let's take some of their money away and give it to these other people, we should make drugs legal.
Okay.
Right?
All drugs? All
drugs, right? People have to make their own decisions. They have to live their own lives. We'll have a public health response to that, right? We'll have ways to try to deal with this that are not locking you into prison, right? Sex work, right? All the things that are voluntary that people want to do, that wars you'll never ever win. You're not going to abolish drugs. You're not going to abolish prostitution. Certain things, you let that go and you deal with it a different way. And
it is difficult for me to hear this. I'm being honest with you. Like I hear what you're saying, and I can logically understand.
Yep. But fundamentally, to who you are, it's hard. I know.
It's difficult.
The same way.
It's not just as a Mennonite. It's even, I think, as a foster parent. Well, now adoptive parent. But like some of the reasons why they were not able to find. Well, I don't want to overshare any story. Those two issues in particular. I have seen, I'm just trying to say, I have seen the impacts on vulnerable children and so there is this part of me that I have wrestled with that maybe, if I'm being honest, what if it's that it's vindictive, maybe that I'm like, you hurt these children. Now I want you to go to jail, even though there is this other part of me that's like, that's not who I am. That wouldn't solve the problem. Anyhow, not that this is intended therapy for me, but
you're doing the hard work there. Right? That's the hard work, what you're doing. And saying, well, why do I feel this way? Right? I might just be angry. Right? Mm-hmm. I'm so against everything that I personally believe. Like I barely drink. I don't do drugs. I don't engage in sex work on either end, I guess.
I was like, is he going to say I don't have sex? Because I will question that.
Well, anyway.
No, I got you. I'm taking this to a whole new level.
Hey, we can get real. We can get real here.
Everyone else that was going to say, please interview me next, their hands are going down.
No, but in all seriousness, you have to ask yourself, do we want to punish people for these things? Every woman I've ever met in the county jail, not everyone, but a lot of them, have the same story. I was young. Something really terrible happened to me. I turned to alcohol and drugs because I didn't have another way. I turned to crime, right? And now I'm in the county jail.
Yeah.
So it's like you're punishing this young girl, right, for what happened. And it's so complicated. And it's like not that it's okay, not that we shouldn't try to intervene, but a criminal justice punishment, intervention, I have a hard time accepting that.
So even again, taking my HR world and putting it in the community world, like one of the questions I ask leaders and HR team members, or just culture stakeholders really, anyhow, is, are you trying to cover your ass are these meetings with someone about their problematic behavior, about making a paper trail so if you need to fire them later, there's no lawsuit? Right. So is that what it's about? Or is it about making it better? Right. Is it truly about seeing change, or is it about punishment? Right. Do you want someone to feel bad and know that you have the power and you caught them and they're caught? Or do you want to know what it would be like if this person's life changed? And now I'm like championing the cause that you just said 5 seconds ago. I was like, that's a terrible idea. Prostitution is bad though. And now I'm like,
as an aspiring sex worker, we'll see what comes out of this.
So, okay, so that's very interesting. And you've touched some on if it's not disband the police, because I'll say that in preparation for this interview, I was reading up on the arguments people make for disbanding the police. And I got to be honest, this is an issue I waffle on, because I read the arguments and I'm like, I see that. And like one of the things that kind of I felt sort of defensive about when I read it, because I'm someone who has had ideas for like mindful improv methodology to train police officers. And like, what would it be like to be able to be in that collaborative creative zone when they're in, improv is all about follow the fear and invites you to have a different relationship with fear. And I've thought different times like, wow, that could be really powerful for police officers who, are in these dangerous situations. Anyhow. So I've had this idea of like, what if my contribution was putting together a mindful improv methodology training for police officers? And then I'm reading these comments that are like, training will not help. We've tried this already. It's not about training. There's no amount of training that can fix this problem. And it feels super deflating. But then I think like reading the statistics that they're touting, I'm like, okay, well, I get that. I get why this person is like, the only answer is we have to be done now. Like, you can't fix this. And so I don't know, like when you hear people, and I'm sure that that's not news to you, that people are saying there's no amount of training that can.
That's true. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, if we can't all accept our roles in this, right? We can't all accept our individual racism, how that contributes to the structural racism. The police disappear tomorrow, it'll just play out more in the hospitals, or we won't think about it in the hospitals or in the school. We kill so many Black people every day in this country, far away from the police. And it's just in ways we don't see and we don't think about. And actually, we have an improv thing happening that you should get involved with.
Please let me know. Yeah. And to your point just now, like my 7-year-old daughter, NPR just turns on in our car when you start the car. And I don't always notice. It's just like in the background. I don't even notice. But she heard people talking about defunding the police, and she's 7. And she asked me like, they were talking about getting rid of police. And it was clear enough that she understood that's what they were talking about. And she said, are we going to not have police anymore? And I said, no, that's not probably what's going to happen. And she said, but you say all things are possible. And I said, okay, I do say those words to you. But what I think is, and I said, and I almost said, you know me, you barely know me.
Don't listen to your mother.
Yeah. Hey, I love whichever child is in the other room, but whatever. Oh, okay. All right. Noise is happening. Anyway, so she's asking me like, are we going to not have police anymore? And I'm trying to tell her, like, well, you're allowed to have whatever opinion you think. And, feel free to read some research and like, let me know your perspective on this. You don't have to believe everything I believe, blah, 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 I'm saying to her. But, I told her, Nora, the reality is that yes, police do hurt Black people at a higher frequency than they hurt white people. And that's heartbreaking and horrible. And I said, the other thing is that there's a lot of Black people who can't get health care the same way. And so they're dying of things that people in my family are not going to die of, And, she's 7 and she goes, what does health disparities mean? And I was like, I'm not doing a great job. Anyway, so all of that was an anecdotal story to say that what you're saying is a thought I've had too, that there are lots of ways that, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement, I don't know if it's fair to say, and maybe a listener can weigh in on this, but I don't know if it's fair to say that the Black Lives Matter is championing the defund the police or abolish police movement, or I don't know if it's fair to say that that's a core component of the Black Lives Matter movement. I don't know if those things would be fair to say. But one thought that I've had is that, like, it's so much bigger than police. Like, that is the topical issue right now. But if we really want to save Black lives, there are many, many, many places where this enthusiasm needs to bleed into.
That's right.
Question from Facebook user. Do you think there's a way to recreate the Inside Out magic on a larger scale? Magic is the best way to explain what happens in our Inside Out classes. So this is wonderful. There must be someone who's more familiar.
We're everywhere.
Yeah.
Actually, I've had an idea. I just pitched it to our think tank this morning. I'd like to do a citywide course on this issue, right? And you'd have a professor from any of the great schools we have in this city, a returning citizen like the guys I work with, a law enforcement professional, a community leader. And imagine you have 15 weeks and you're doing it on Zoom and you're doing it collaboratively and you're bringing in national experts. And also, so you might have a lecture, maybe an organizational class, a lecture, and then a recitation where you're putting dialogues in play in sort of smaller groups, right? So the next thing I want to try to do is to get this happening right now, because one thing I hate is whether the politicians are trying to get you to look over here, here's the thing, and the activists and this group or that group, here, look at these statistics. I can't make it work here, it's not mirroring. But I can't, maybe I'm not the person to do this. Maybe someone else should come up with this idea. But look over here. But really, everyone's got to look at the whole picture.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The politicians want your vote, and they don't care how they get them. And the different organizations and the activists, they oftentimes want your money or someone's money, right? That's what it's really about. And we need them. We need the politicians. We need all the groups, all the activists. And that's why when I talk about defund the police being a hustle, I really believe that. But if we look at the whole picture, and if we have some kind of, we're all learning from each other, learning together, walking through this process, understanding that, it's not just these three statistics that this group is talking about. It's not just these three statistics that the mayor's office is talking about. It's all that and so much more.
Mm-hmm.
Don't defund, abolish, reform American racism. None of it's not going to help.
So I imagine that things that will help is a primary focus of discussion in the El Center Bennu think tank for restorative justice. Mm-hmm. And I know that you shared with me, I think it was 4 core components of things that you talked about. Yep. One was kind of paving the way for supporting returning citizens. One was community policing. Mm-hmm. And can you, I see my notes there like a bit away and my eyesight isn't great. Can you share like some of the other like core things that you were saying are topics of discussion?
Our think tank meets every Friday morning, 8:30 to 10:30. It's open to anyone that wants to come. It's artists, activists,
I'll post about that. Yeah.
Cops, returning citizens, and there are inside out think tanks like this all over the world now. But this is ours in town. And the first Friday of the month, we deal with sort of publications and presentations because we're always writing and publishing and giving talks. The second Friday of the month is reentry. So we have great local guys like Tally Thompson, who's leading those sort of efforts. We're actually working on creating a 3-quarter house called the House of Life.
Yes.
We've been successful in raising some money for that. You might have seen the short film that Weidman did for us. The third Friday, that was today, that was policing. I talked about sort of the improv thing we're doing today, and I talked about the giant citywide course. And then the fourth Friday of the week is like catch up, not like Heinz ketchup, but catching up. Mm-hmm. And if we're lucky enough to have a fifth Friday occasionally, that's supposed to be a party, but I don't know how the hell you have a party on Zoom. So
no, I'm on there. Everyone's just drinking separately in their homes. Yeah. So, okay. I feel like there's just so many things to boil down into, like, I saw so many different ideas of like really interesting topics, like the idea of training police to be steeped in fear, you know.
Yeah.
And I think I would love to just maybe spend a whole nother session talking specifically about ways that it can get better. You know, like I understand that there's been kind of a lot of defining the problem. I hope that people heard some solutions. Maybe it's good to recap some solutions. At the beginning, I talked about paying attention to the fact that there are disparities in voter registration and in driver's license. I don't know, do you call it ownership or having ship? And that doesn't, in addition to there just being decreased mobility there's all, and you know, voting is so important, but it's also about jury makeup. And so if we want to have fairer outcomes, then we need more diversity. We need more representation on our juries. And then participate when it's your turn. When you get called, participate. Another thing that we talked about was voting in the upcoming election, May 18th. You can join the Elsinore Bennu think tank. Norman was saying that that is open for people's participation. I don't know how we get started in legalizing all drugs and sex work, but do you
at my house this weekend?
Do you have any just talking points or idea, like how?
That's not what I do.
Yeah.
I just know that criminal justice punishment solutions to problems don't ever work.
And so it sounds like some of this is not just about racial disparities. I mean, do you think that it would speak to racial justice to decriminalize all drugs, or not just decriminalize, but you said legalize, which is a different.
Legalize, decriminalize, call it what you want. We got to stop arresting people for it.
Yeah.
You know, because people do. I mean, believe me, I spent a lot of time in a table with men who are never going to get out of prison or expected to never get out of prison. Mm-hmm. And I sat at the feet of those elders, and they understand that if you make the choice to sell drugs, you're giving yourself into that system. Right? You can say what you want about how racist it all is, and it is. At the same time, and it's so much easier said than done, but you got to try to starve that beast, right? No matter what. You, as a black man, you cannot do anything. And I understand even if you don't, there's still people going to get arrested. What I'm saying is, if you make the choice you're volunteering for the new slavery. Right? You can't let the state own you.
Yeah. When it comes to these particular things, and I hear what you're saying, that there are, like last week in the conversation with Carrie Bozich, I was even referencing Bill Strickland's book, Making the Impossible Possible. Have you read that, or are you familiar with that?
I know Bill though.
Yeah, you know Bill. So, okay, here it is. I think that you would probably deeply appreciate this book. Yeah. So I read it and learned things I didn't understand. Like, he talks about trap doors when you grow up in the ghetto. And I feel like the felony murder thing is a perfect example. And last week I was sharing a statistic that everyone can fact check me on by clicking the link. I posted the article, but there are over 1,000 people in the state of Pennsylvania serving life sentences for second-degree murder or felony murder. And over 80% of them are Black people. It's not the case that 80% of the people that commit second-degree murder, to the degree that one can commit that charge, it's not the case that 80% of them are Black. And so I think, yeah, I don't know if that's necessarily pushback to what you're saying so much as it's just supplemental. Yeah.
One pushback I get sometimes is like, when you're frozen out of the white man's world, what other options do you have? Right? And it's like, and my response to that, okay, there is this white man. He's a giant, purely white man, and who urinates bleach. White man, get it? And
yeah.
Oh, he wants you to sell drugs in your community, right? That big bad white man. He wants you in prison. He wants you dead, right? So you can be frozen out of the white man's economy in that sense, but you're going to get shifted into this other place where he wants you, and it's all part of the same game.
So, I mean, I think though, like to speak to the desperation that is being referred to in those situations. And, when I say I am living that, what I mean is I am watching that scenario unfold over and over and over in front of my home. And it is just heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking. There is nothing that I like about what is happening, in this situation. And so I do think about, but so I'm going to save, I really want to plug a thing that's not ready to be plugged yet. But if you did not catch my interview with Cornell Jones, I hope you guys will go back and watch it. And I am inviting him again. I haven't even told him this. He'll be fine with it. He might be watching right now.
He's the best. Cornell is the best person in the world.
He is the best.
He really is.
And anyhow, so can't plug it yet. But I'm going to invite him.
Don't do it.
No, I won't.
A white person always ruins everything.
No way.
Please don't be that white person.
I won't. But there are the reason that I was saying this is that there is something to be said about making more opportunities and increasing awareness of opportunities that exist. That's another thing. I'll plug this instead. Again, make the impossible possible. And the work that's being done at Manchester Bidwell, just down the street from where I live. And so yes, I empathize very deeply with when that pushback that you've been given. I empathize deeply with that to the extent that I can as someone who has had opportunities. And,
the flip on that is to understand that people who are in that category of white, we have to understand that fundamentally we must want it like that, right? If we're not out there doing something to change it so that there are opportunities, so that people aren't in that position where they have to say, I'm going to self-immolate rather than sell drugs, right? I will sit here and starve to death rather than do that because that's my commitment to Black liberation or whatever.
mm-hmm.
We should be out there, people that can help create opportunities or work or do whatever we can do, or just not stop wanting this. Stop wanting to project every bad thing we think about ourselves onto Black people. Going back to John Edgar Weidman, John Edgar Weidman wrote one time, if Black people didn't exist, America would have invented them. And we've been inventing Black people from day one. And until we let go of whiteness and try to be human beings together, change the police, change the laws, do whatever you want, but one way or another, we'll always get back here.
So when he says let go of whiteness, like this is a concept, if that's new for you, I learned about this idea from a man named Ta-Nehisi Coates, who wrote a really wonderful book called Between the World and Me that I hope you'll read if you haven't yet. And I was really struck by some of his thoughts on, that race is a social construct. That was my first time to hear that. And I was like, but
Really?
what do you mean? I can look at my skin and see that it is different from your skin. Like, what do you mean that that's a social construct? But the more I learned about it, the more I was like, that is a fact. That is real. And one of the things that he suggested is to stop identifying as white and instead to identify as Swedish American or Mennonite or whatever your ethnicity is, and to really attach to what culture is, because you're saying there is no such thing as white culture. And anyhow, I found that to be both challenging and instructive in a really helpful way. So I just wasn't sure if anyone wasn't sure what that would mean to let go of whiteness. He's not suggesting that you
but it's like race is this idea like I know Superman's not coming, but I'm waiting for him, right? I know there's no such thing. It's like it's very hard, right? And you're struggling with this to realize that you're not white. You've been told your whole life, and you're told a million ways every day, you are white, and white means this, and Black means that, and whatever else means whatever it means. And all this stuff was created so one group of people could own another group of people.
Yeah.
That's all it is. And like I said, I'm pushing 50. It's very hard for me, even though I know I'm not white, to believe I'm not. Like I know intellectually I'm not white, but I believe I'm white.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the dissonance, the cognitive dissonance. And until we all address that in ourselves and each other, forgive everyone and change, everything else is just politics, and politics is based on racism in this country. So we're just in a bad situation.
Yeah. So, and since we're not a great template for that, I can't believe it. I must seem so scholarly. I planned this ahead of time, so you'd think I'm a really smart person that reads.
You are.
I did happen to read a book called Nothing to Envy. No, Bad Samaritans. It's this one, Bad Samaritans. Have you heard of this book before?
No.
Okay, so it's a really fascinating book by an economist, a Korean economist named Ha-Joon Chang. And in a nutshell, I'm so excited about this book. I never thought I'd care about economics in this way. But I had the opportunity to spend some time in South Korea in college and learned a little bit about the Korea conflict. We say the Korean War is over. Nobody in Korea says the Korean War is over. And at the end of the Korean War, by American standards, South Korea was poorer than Haiti. I mean, it was completely devastated. And when I was there in 2008 or 2009, and I know our country was imploding economically at that point, but when I was there then, South Korea's economy was stronger than ours. And so Ha-Joon Chang explains, like, how does a country go from being economically devastated to not being economically devastated? Uh-oh, am I back? I think I'm back.
You're back.
Haiti is a country that's almost completely Black and has been economically devastated for a variety of reasons that have to do with political instability. But one of the things it also has to do with, and he explains this in this book, is that with every good intention, we have kicked away the ladder.
Yep.
That's what he talks about, is kicking away the ladder. And so when I think about restorative justice, I think about Ha-Joon Chang, and I think about the examples that he's given and how Korea was able to do this, the South Korea, and how America can maybe stop doing this to Haiti, but also to Black people and people of color in our own country. So I found it deeply informative. It's called Bad Samaritans. And if you can't tell by the title, it's about this idea of, even when you have good intentions, it is patronizing and counterproductive to assume you know what needs to happen without asking brave questions, basically. So anyhow, we are way over time, and I want to be respectful of your schedule.
I'll sit here with you all day. I don't care.
I would as well. I do need to help my children with virtual learning.
I do not want to harm children, but I will.
Yes. Listen, I have been there as well. So listen, folks, if you maybe were feeling like you needed some time to think about just what you think about policing, racism in policing, racism in criminal justice, if we didn't touch on a topic that you were hoping that we would, or you have a specific question, maybe you're going to Google Norm and find out more about his work and have questions later. Norm, do I understand that you are not on Facebook?
I don't have a cell phone. I'm not on Facebook. I have LinkedIn because I'm somehow hoping money will come out of that somehow. It hasn't yet. My email is normanconti@gmail.com if you want to email me.
Okay, normanconti@gmail.com. I was going to say, normally what I say when I'm wrapping it up here is we will go back through the comments. If you're watching the replay, he's not going to do that. He's not going to go back. I will go.
That is never going to happen.
It's never going to happen.
If I lived to be 1,000, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't spend 1 second. If you email me, that's fine.
Yes. So I will put his email in the comments and in a couple places, and his home address and home phone number.
For this weekend.
Yeah. But I know that he would love to keep this conversation going, and I would as well. So I'll be back through these comments and just engaging with you guys. But if you do have questions specifically for him, who is the expert on this topic, well, a contributor. You're right. I don't like the word expert either. But a contributor and someone who has been thoughtful about this and curious about this for a long time. I'm sure he would love to learn alongside you. Is that a way to?
Yeah, I don't want to say love to my man Big Lou. I know he's out there watching.
Okay. So I will post links to Elsinore Bennu Think Tank if you'd like to participate. I'll follow up on this later today and provide some more resources. But yeah, thank you so much for your time and for talking with me.
It's been really wonderful. Thank you for having me.
All right. Have a great day.
You too.